The diner sat along a quiet stretch of highway in Texas, where truckers stopped for coffee and families pulled in after long road trips. Every morning, long before the sun came up, Alicia pushed through the heavy back door. She tied on a faded apron, rolled her sleeves, and went straight to work. No one greeted her, no one asked how she was doing. She was simply the one who scrubbed the griddle clean, stacked the chipped plates, and refilled the ketchup bottles before the place opened. Most customers never even noticed her face, but Alicia had a secret. She carried in her memory the smell of her grandmother's kitchen. Fried chicken sizzling in cast iron, cornbread cooling on the windowsill, the kind of food that made hard days softer. She never spoke about it at work, not once. Around here, her job was to be invisible. Still, there was a fire inside her. Some nights, when the diner closed and the lights dimmed, she would linger by the stove, touching the handles like an old friend, imagining what she could create if anyone ever let her cook. One night, after the last customer had left and the neon sign outside flickered off, Alicia stayed behind. The kitchen smelled of grease and coffee, the kind of scent that clung to her clothes long after she went home. She wiped down the counter slowly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, waiting until the place was completely still. In a corner basket sat a few things the cooks had tossed aside. Half a bag of cornmeal, chicken pieces no one had wanted, a small bundle of herbs starting to wilt. To anyone else, they were scraps. To Alicia, they looked like possibility. She set a pan on the burner and moved carefully, almost reverently. The oil hissed as she laid the chicken down, coating it in a crust her grandmother had taught her when she was just a child. She whisked together cornbread batter with steady hands, adding a pinch of spice only she knew by memory. The air filled with warmth, with a kind of comfort that didn't belong to the diner but to home. When she finally sat at the back table with her plate, she closed her eyes on the first bite. For a moment, she wasn't the woman everyone overlooked. She was simply Alicia, tasting a piece of her own story. She packed the rest into an old plastic container, scribbled her initials on the lid, and slid it to the back of the fridge. It wasn't meant for anyone else. It was just a way to remind herself that her dreams were still alive, even if no one else could see them. It was close to midnight when the bell above the diner door jingled. Alicia looked up from wiping a booth and saw a man step inside, shoulders heavy from a long drive. His boots were caked with dust, and his cap bore the name of a trucking company. "Kitchen still open?" he asked, his voice tired but polite. The cook had already left. The grill was cold, the menu board flipped to closed. Alicia almost shook her head, but the way he rubbed his stomach told her he hadn't eaten all day. "We're out of everything," she said softly, then hesitated. "But I might have something." She slipped into the kitchen, pulled the plastic container from the back of the fridge, and reheated the chicken and cornbread. The smell filled the empty diner, rich and warm, carrying a piece of her grandmother's kitchen into the night. When she placed the plate in front of him, the man blinked. "This isn't on the menu." "Just something I made for myself," Alicia admitted. He took a bite. His fork froze halfway to his mouth, eyes widening as if he had just remembered a taste from years ago. Slowly he set the fork down, leaned back, and let out a low whistle. "Mom," he said, shaking his head, "I've been on the road 30 years and I swear to you, this is the best fried chicken I've ever had." Alicia lowered her eyes, hiding a small smile. For the first time, someone outside her family had tasted what she carried inside her heart. The diner was quiet, except for the steady hum of the ceiling fan. The trucker kept eating, shaking his head after every bite like he couldn't believe what he was tasting. "This is something special," he said finally, glancing up at Alicia. "You got no idea how rare it is to find food that tastes like home." Alicia smiled politely, unsure how to answer. She wasn't used to compliments. Before leaving, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Hope you don't mind," he said with a grin, holding it up. "I run a little page online. Folks follow me for truck stop meals, diners across the country. Gonna share this with them." She hesitated, then nodded. It felt harmless. Just one man, one video. He filmed a quick clip at the counter, showing the golden crust of the chicken, the steaming cornbread, and his wide smile. "Best roadside meal I've had in years," he told the camera. "And it wasn't even on the menu. Some kind soul in the back made it happen." When he left, the neon sign buzzed faintly as the door swung shut behind him. Alicia stayed behind, wiping down the counter again, pretending it was just another night. She didn't know that by morning, the video would already be circling phones and timelines, reaching thousands of strangers who suddenly wanted to know who was the woman behind that plate of food. By the next morning, Alicia showed up to the diner like always, quiet, head down, apron tied tight. But something was different. The parking lot was half full before sunrise. Inside, a couple at the counter asked the waitress, "Hey, is this the place with that chicken from the video?" The waitress blinked. "What video?" A man in a baseball cap pulled out his phone, showing a clip of the trucker grinning with his plate. The views were climbing by the second. Soon more customers walked in. Some locals, some who had driven miles out of their way. They weren't ordering pancakes or burgers. They were all asking the same thing. "We came for the fried chicken cornbread. Is Alicia here?" From the kitchen doorway, Alicia froze. She wasn't used to hearing her name in the dining room. For years she had been a shadow. Now strangers were speaking it out loud. The manager frowned, confused. The head cook muttered under his breath, annoyed. But the customers didn't care. They wanted the food that had reminded them of home, the one thing not written on the diner's menu. Alicia stood still, torn between pride and fear. She had never cooked for a room full of people. Yet here they were, waiting for something she had only dared to make in secret. By the end of the week, the little diner was busier than it had ever been. Families crowded into booths, truckers lined the counter, and strangers pulled off the highway just to see if the rumours were true. But when reporters from a local paper showed up with cameras and notebooks, they didn't ask for Alicia. They went straight to the owner. He smiled proudly, standing by the grill like he had done all the work himself. "Yes, that fried chicken and cornbread recipe is ours," he told them. "It's part of what makes this diner special." From the back corner, Alicia heard every word. She was wiping down trays, the same way she always had, her hands moving automatically while her chest tightened. The truth was right there. She had made the dish, poured her memories into it, but no one said her name. The article came out the next morning. "Highway Diner's secret recipe draws crowds." The headline carried his picture, not hers. Customers kept ordering the meal, and the diner kept serving it, but Alicia was still told to wash dishes and scrub tables. Every plate of her grandmother's recipe went out under someone else's name. And though the dining room roared with laughter and conversation, Alicia felt smaller than ever, like she was disappearing inside the very thing she had created. The Saturday rush came early. By mid-morning the diner was packed, the line stretching out the door. The air smelled of coffee and fried batter. But the talk wasn't about pancakes or burgers. It was about one dish, the one no one could stop sharing online. A group of regulars walked in, holding up their phones with the viral video still playing. They didn't even bother with menus. "We're here for Alicia's chicken," one of them said loudly, turning to the room. "That's what we came for." The words hung in the air. Customers at nearby tables looked up, some nodded. A couple across the aisle chimed in, "Yeah, where's Alicia? We want her cooking." Behind the counter, the owner froze. The head cook looked uneasy. For the first time, the crowded diner wasn't listening to them. It was waiting for her. From the kitchen doorway, Alicia stood with a towel in her hand, heart pounding. She had spent years blending into the background, never once hearing strangers call her name like this. Now, voices from every corner of the diner were rising together, chanting softly, then louder. "Alicia, Alicia!" Her eyes stung as she stepped forward. She didn't speak, not yet. She just looked at the faces smiling back at her, people who had never met her but already knew what she carried in her food. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. The chant of her name had barely faded when the owner stormed out from behind the counter. His face was red, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. "Enough!" he barked. "This is my diner, my recipe. You all wouldn't even be here without me." The customers went quiet, but their eyes stayed fixed on Alicia. She stood still by the doorway, her towel clutched in one hand. He turned on her then, jabbing a finger in the air. "You wash dishes, you mop floors. That's all you are here. Don't go filling their heads with nonsense. You are not a chef." The words landed heavy in the crowded room. A little boy at the counter stared wide-eyed. A woman set down her coffee cup with a clink. The silence felt colder than the morning wind outside. Alicia didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply straightened her shoulders and looked at him, her eyes steady. For the first time, everyone could see the difference, the anger on his face, the calm on hers. From the back of the diner, someone pulled out a phone. Another followed. A few customers whispered as the scene unfolded, and one of them quietly pressed record. The owner didn't notice. You think you're special because some truck driver liked your leftovers. Without this place, you're nothing. You'd be invisible again in a heartbeat. Alicia took a slow breath. I was invisible long before this, she said softly, but they tasted the truth, and that doesn't belong to you. A hush swept the room. The cameras kept rolling. Somewhere a hashtag was already being typed that would change everything. That night, Alicia walked home with her apron folded under her arm. The streets were quiet, the glow of streetlights stretching across the cracked sidewalks. She had no paycheck in her pocket, no job to go back to in the morning. At her small apartment, the kitchen light flickered as she set down her bag. Her little girl, Maya, peeked out from the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. "Mama, you're home late," she whispered. Alicia forced a smile and crouched down to hug her tight. "Yeah, baby, I'm home." Maya looked past her shoulder toward the empty counter. "Did they let you cook today?" The question caught her off guard. Alicia's throat tightened. She brushed a curl from her daughter's cheek, searching for the right words. "I cooked," she said finally, her voice soft. "But I won't be cooking there anymore." Maya tilted her head. "Then where will you cook? We need your chicken, Mama." Alicia laughed lightly, though her eyes brimmed. "We'll figure it out, I promise." Later, after tucking Maya into bed, Alicia sat alone at the table, staring at her hands. They were tired, cracked from years of soap and hot water, but they still remembered every flavour, every recipe. Through the thin walls, a neighbour's voice called out, "Saw you online, girl. That video's everywhere. Don't you quit now." Alicia closed her eyes. She didn't know how, but she felt it. The fire inside her was still there. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. A few days later, Alicia was sitting on the front steps of her apartment when a familiar pickup truck pulled up. Her old friend Denise climbed out, carrying a set of keys that jingled in her hand. "I saw what happened," Denise said gently. "Everybody did, and I know you're out of work, but maybe you don't need their kitchen anymore." Alicia frowned, unsure. "What do you mean?" Denise pointed toward the curb, where an old food truck sat parked. The paint was peeling, the tyres sagged a little, and the once bright lettering had faded almost white. "She's been sitting in my uncle's lot for years," Denise explained. "Engine still runs, needs love, but it could be yours if you want it." Alicia stepped closer, running her hand over the rusty door. It smelled faintly of grease and dust, but when she peered inside, she saw the outline of a griddle, a counter, and just enough space to imagine something new. Her daughter Maya pressed against her side, eyes wide. "Mama," she whispered, "is this our restaurant?" Alicia laughed through tears, pulling her close. "Not yet, baby, but maybe it's the start of one." That evening, she scrubbed the truck's counters with steel wool, wiped the windows until they shined, and taped a handwritten sign to the side panel. 3 words in simple block letters, Mabel's Kitchen, her grandmother's name. It wasn't much, but it was hers. For the first time, Alicia looked at the chipped metal and fading paint not with doubt, but with hope. The morning of her opening, the sky was grey and heavy with rain. Alicia stood by the food truck, tugging her jacket tighter as drops pattered against the metal roof. She had woken up before dawn, marinating the chicken, mixing the cornbread batter, and setting out jars of spice just like her grandmother once did. But by noon, only 2 people had stopped by. One curious passerby who bought a soda, and another who asked if the truck sold burgers, then walked away when she said no. Her daughter sat on a stool inside, chin resting in her hands. "Mama," she whispered, "what if nobody comes?" Alicia tried to smile, though her heart ached. "Then we'll eat it ourselves. Nothing goes to waste." She placed a steaming plate of fried chicken and cornbread on the counter, more out of habit than hope. That was when an elderly woman, wrapped in a floral scarf, stepped out of the rain and approached. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the plate. She took one bite, then another, and slowly set her fork down. Tears welled in her eyes. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I haven't tasted this since I was a girl. My mama used to make it the same way with scraps and whatever she could find. You brought her back to me." Alicia's chest tightened, tears threatening to spill. The woman reached across the counter, touching her hand. "Don't you stop. People need this." The rain kept falling, but for Alicia, the world suddenly felt lighter. One customer, one plate, but it was enough to remind her why she had started. The story of the woman in the floral scarf travelled faster than Alicia expected. By the next week, a young reporter from the local paper showed up, notebook in hand and rain still dripping from her coat. She ordered the chicken and cornbread, took a few careful bites, and set her fork down with a smile. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" she said. Alicia hesitated, wiping her hands on a towel. She wasn't used to anyone pointing a pen at her, let alone a camera, but something in the reporter's eyes felt kind. So she told the truth, how the recipe came from her grandmother, how she had been let go from the diner, how she was just trying to keep going for her daughter. 2 days later, the article ran with the headline, "From Dishwasher to Food Truck Dream." The photo showed Alicia standing in front of the truck, apron tied, Maya peeking shyly from behind her leg. Online, the comments rolled in. Some were filled with praise. "This is the America I love, grit and soul on a plate. Where can I find this truck?" Others were harsher. "She just got lucky. Anybody can fry chicken." Alicia read them all late at night, the glow of her phone lighting her tired face. The doubt stung, but the encouragement carried her through. For the first time in her life, strangers believed in her. The next morning, the line outside the truck stretched down the block. Rain or shine, people were coming, not just for the food, but for the story behind it. The line at Mabel's kitchen moved steadily when Alicia noticed a figure standing apart from the crowd. Arms crossed, jaw tight, his polished shoes splashing in the puddles, her former boss. For a moment her stomach dropped. Memories of his shouting in the diner, the way he had claimed her work as his own, came rushing back. Still, she kept serving plates, one customer after another, until he finally stepped forward. "You've done well for yourself," he said flatly. His eyes swept over the chalkboard menu, the long line of people, the laughter spilling from the truck. "But you and I both know that recipe started in my kitchen." Alicia set down the ladle, meeting his gaze. "No, it started in my grandmother's kitchen. I just happened to carry it with me when you weren't looking." His lips pressed thin. "We could make this official, you know. Partner up. You let me put this dish back on the diner menu, and I'll make sure your name gets mentioned this time. We can both profit." The customers nearby went quiet, ears tilting toward the conversation. Alicia could feel her daughter's eyes watching from inside the truck. She shook her head. "That recipe isn't for sale, and it doesn't need your name beside it. People come here because they know it's real. They can taste the truth." For a second he looked like he might argue. But the crowd had shifted, their expressions cool, protective. He realised he wasn't the man in charge anymore. Without another word, he turned and walked back down the street, his reflection breaking apart in the rain puddles. Alicia picked up the ladle again, her hand steady. The line of customers cheered quietly, not loud enough to embarrass her, but enough to let her know she wasn't alone anymore. By late summer, the buzz around Mabel's kitchen had spread beyond the neighbourhood. Flyers went up for the annual food truck festival downtown, and to Alicia's surprise, her name was listed among the vendors. On the day of the event, rows of colourful trucks lined the streets. The smell of barbecue, tacos, and fresh bread drifted through the air. Musicians played on a small stage while families strolled with paper plates in hand. When Alicia pulled her old truck into place, she felt out of place at first. Other vendors had sleek signs, polished counters, and teams of staff. She had peeling paint, a chalkboard menu, and her daughter passing out napkins. But as the morning went on, her line grew longer and longer, winding past the curb. People laughed and snapped photos, posting about the chicken that tasted like home. A woman hugged her after the first bite. A man wiped his eyes, muttering that his grandmother used to cook the same way. By afternoon, the organisers invited Alicia to the stage. She walked up with shaking hands, her apron stained with flour and grease. The crowd clapped, cheering her name, and for a moment she stood frozen in the spotlight. The announcer leaned in. "Tell us, Alicia, what makes your food so special?" She cleared her throat, eyes sweeping over the crowd. "It's not just food," she said. "It's memory, it's family, it's everything I thought I had to keep hidden. Until you all reminded me it was worth sharing." The applause rose, warm and steady, wrapping around her like a promise. For the first time, Alicia believed that this was no accident. She belonged here. That evening, after the festival lights dimmed and the streets emptied, Alicia parked the truck back in her neighbourhood. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of roasted corn and charcoal from the day's celebration. She climbed onto the roof of the old food truck, her daughter curling up beside her with a blanket draped over their shoulders. For once, Alicia wasn't thinking about bills or recipes or tomorrow's prep list. She just let herself breathe. Maya yawned and whispered, "Mama, today felt like a dream." Alicia kissed her forehead. It was real, baby, every part of it. She looked down at her hands, stained with flour and oil, and felt something steady inside her. These hands had washed dishes in silence, been told they weren't good enough, and almost given up. But tonight, they had fed a city. Across the street, a few neighbours waved from their porches. One called out, "We're proud of you, Alicia." She waved back, smiling, her chest full in a way words couldn't describe. The little truck beneath her wasn't shiny. The paint was still chipped, the engine still groaned on cold mornings. But to her it wasn't just metal and wheels, it was proof. Proof that she didn't need permission to be seen, that dreams could be rebuilt from scraps. She leaned back against the roof, looking up at the quiet night sky. In a voice almost like a prayer, she whispered, "Thank you, Grandma. We made it." And in that moment, Alicia knew she wasn't invisible anymore. She was exactly where she was meant to be. True talent doesn't need permission to shine. Even when overlooked or underestimated, staying true to yourself and your craft will eventually make the world notice. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and support. If this story touched you, please give it a like, subscribe, and share it with others. We'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.